We incubated a business from scratch. That was another 9-year journey. So that's how it all got started. I started my career at Intel.
How do you differentiate today when there are 10 really well-funded companies attacking the same problem statement with roughly a similar approach?
I would say companies that are funded at scale. This is not for the faint-hearted. It's a very capital-intensive problem to go solve. So you really need investors with deep pockets, and how that can continue to scale generation over generation, not just a one generation thing. NVIDIA and Jensen personally know each of these guys really well, right? So they go and deliver hardware to each of them long before any of the other companies even get access to hardware.
Welcome, Sid, and thanks for taking the time out. I have a list of questions. We will not follow script, and as we discussed, we will try to keep it as fun as we can. I was telling Sid before we started that he's a Gujju businessman building in semiconductors, which is why we see the dhanda and the fast scale of the startup.
Jugad, a lot of jugad.
Jugaad and dhanda. That's what keeps Indian businesses going. But I'll start actually from the beginning and your background, Sid. Obviously, you grew up in India, in Ahmedabad. Did your undergrad in India, moved to the US, worked in MNCs for a few years, then was part of the journey of Infi, and then you decided to obviously start D-Matrix. So take us through your first couple of years. What made you move to US? How was the Infi journey like? And then we'll come to D-Matrix.
Yeah. No, thanks. First of all, thank you everyone for coming. I know it's Monday. It's always a tough day, first day of the week, and for you to brave Bangalore traffic. I just braved through 1.5 hour of Bangalore traffic and got here, and I know what it is like. So thank you. Really appreciate all of you for being here. Yeah. So I like to say, first of all, I'm a chip guy. Been a chip and systems guy pretty much my entire career. I just there was a time in my career where I was early on when I was doing my master's at Purdue. I was trying to figure out, should I go down the software track or should I go down, do more, core electrical engineering. And I just had that passion for building something that, you could feel and touch. And that is what kind of led me down the path of wanting to build, chips, right? And so that's how it all got started. I started my career at Intel, building chips, and this was Intel in the late 90s. It was a very different company back then, and not like the Intel that you might read about in the news these days. They really dominated compute and learned a lot about what it takes to build and a methodology. They had a very, very strict methodology around how to kind of go about building silicon and building chips, and that was great training for me. But as Sudipto said, I come from a Guju Bania family, and entrepreneurship was somewhere in my DNA because my dad was an entrepreneur. Both my paternal and maternal grandfathers were both entrepreneurs. So I knew at some point, working in a big company was not going to be for me. And so right after Intel, I stayed there for about 3 to 4 years, and then I was ready to kind of leap out and do something of my own. And my first startup was a company called Aeluros, where we were building 10 gig connectivity chips. This is circa 2001, and this was literally right after the dot-com bust. And it wasn't very clear that the bandwidth, which was so hyped up during the internet bubble, suddenly there was no demand for any kind of bandwidth, right? But we started this company to go build the next step up in connectivity chips, and we did that for about 9 years. Eventually, that group got acquired by NetLogic, and then eventually by Broadcom. And then I went to Infi. This was in 2011. And it's interesting, Infi was a company that had been around for a while, and they were just getting ready to go public, but they had not really been able to break out, and they wanted to break out into the data center market. And I had just come off this journey with Aeluros, NetLogic, Broadcom. We had penetrated, big data centers. So, the CEO of Infi just said, hey, I just want you to come and do exactly what you did there for the last 10 years, just one more time, and this time for me, right? And that's how the Infi journey got started. And it was really, we incubated a business from scratch. And that was another 9-year journey, very successful. We broke into pretty much every single hyperscale customer on the planet. We worked with Google, Meta, AWS. Everyone was using our chips by the end of that journey. That business today is a $2 billion business at Marvell. immensely successful. And I like to brag a little bit here, about this is about the D-Matrix team, because a lot of the core members of that group formed D-Matrix. And I quiz people and say, like, is there a group of individuals that have built a $2 billion business in the semiconductor industry in the last 20 years? There's only one group, and that is the group at D-Matrix, right? So it's a great group of people that founded D-Matrix, and they know what it takes to build a chip, they know what it takes to deploy a chip, they know what it takes to architect a solution that is very practical. They know how to build something that can go to market within a certain market window, and then I get to do the easy job, is just to monetize all of that.
Got it. Fantastic. Uh, like connecting your Infi journey with D-Matrix, right? So 2019, obviously, hugely successful group. Why leave? And while leaving, maybe touch upon a little bit about what that group specialized in. And as you were thinking of starting up in 2019, this is obviously pre-COVID. AI is not as big a buzzword as it was not as big a buzzword as it used to be today, right? So, what did the group specialize? Why leave something that's so compelling? And then in 2019, how did you narrow down into what you want to do next?
And we get that question a lot, right? So I like to say, hardware is hard, right? We all know that. Within that, building chips in hardware is even harder, right? And then if you are building a company that goes and builds chips, it's insanely hard, right? You have to be really stupid to go out and do something like that. And I guess we were amongst the few stupid people who wanted to leave a pretty comfortable job. I mean, we had a very comfortable job. We could have run that business. That business was doing about 300 million in revenue by the time we were thinking of doing this, and then it ramped very quickly to close to $1 billion in revenue, right? So who would want to kind of leave all of that? And a lot of people told us, you guys are crazy. I mean, you spent 8 years building this to where it is, and now you want to step out and start all over again. And do you even understand the pain of starting a company? And are you sure you want to do this? But that was good. Those were the right questions to ask, because that was a test, right? And you get tested when you're trying to start a company. You don't go out and start a company for the sake of starting a company, right? Never do that. Be very sure about why and what you want to do, and spend a lot of time thinking about it. And we did that. We spent almost a year ideating D-Matrix before we kind of went out and said, okay, we're going to incorporate and we're going to go on this journey, right? So that is something I would encourage entrepreneurs to do. But I think in our case, we were pretty clear that we wanted to focus on inference, which is not, by 2019, training was, I think NVIDIA was already the 800-pound gorilla in training by then. And there was kind of the first wave of chip companies that got founded in 2015, AI chip companies, that many of them went after the training problem, because that was the big problem of the time. And the insight later emerged that inference would really be the bigger problem, right? So it's one thing you train only so many times, but then you need to infer infinite number of times, right? So a little bit of luck, because we started in 2019, we had more insight, we were able to learn from the companies in front of us. But I think the real insight or bet we got right, a little bit of luck, I would say, a little bit of insight, was really focusing on transformer workloads in 2020. And the way that happened was we were looking for a product market fit. And we were like, we are, company number 101 building AI chips. And most of them seem to be building chips doing computer vision acceleration, because that was the hot thing to do at the time. And we don't want to be yet another company doing the same thing. What should we really be doing? Where is the technology market fit? Where is the product market fit? And so we kind of kept peeling the onion on that. And what it led us to was, we said, okay, let's run a process of elimination. What do we not want to do? So we said, okay, we clearly don't want to do what 100 other companies are doing. That's obvious. That problem will be solved if it becomes a big problem. There was another area we looked at, which was recommendation engines and ranking and rating engines. Meta was using them a lot. They were actually funding programs to go build chips in that space. And we looked at the market and we said, there is really 4 companies on the planet who would really need this. And if you don't win one of them, you don't have a business. It's too risky, not a place. And the other thing was, from a technology perspective, that problem could be run pretty well on CPUs. You don't really need an accelerator platform. I mean, NVIDIA is doing it today. The reason they built the Grace Hopper platform or the Grace Blackwell platform, and they introduced Grace, is because they want to run recommendation engines on the Grace CPU, right? And they have a different memory hierarchy, totally different memory hierarchy for how they run recommendation engines with Grace. So it was a more of a memory bound problem that could be run on CPU. So we eliminated that. We said not much value we can add there. And right around that time, we ran into data from Google and Microsoft, who were both telling us that, look, transformer workloads are coming. They were invented in 2017. Google had already introduced transformers into English language search, and 10% of English language search was already running through transformers in 2020. And they were saying the trajectory is up. They were also telling us they were going to introduce it into foreign language search the following year, and things would just grow from there. That was Google data. Microsoft data was also telling us that there is pretty much Microsoft is a text company. 70% of the data at Microsoft is in some form of text, and they were saying we're just using a lot of transformers to basically mine through all that text data. So we said, you know what, this is great. It seems like nobody is working on solving the transformer inference problem. Let's go bet on transformer inference. And that went on to become a really good bet for the company, because that became the underlying engine of generative AI. And it surprised us. It surprised us as to how quickly that whole thing just catapulted into something that it has become today, where ChatGPT happened. And then, of course, inference was on everyone's mind. Cost-effective inference was on everyone's mind. And D-Matrix emerged as one of the unique companies that is solving that class of problem at scale, and an emphasis on that.
Got it. No, fantastic. You also covered the next question I would have asked, and I wouldn't take names, but a lot of companies starting 2015, but unfortunately they missed the transformer bus. They ended up solving for a completely different sort of architecture in AI,
Right.
and it's foresight, some luck, and obviously you guys have chosen the right architecture. But even within that, right? If I just break D matrix, and probably I'll cover a little bit of the hardware, the software, and the energy into compute piece in the next three questions. Within hardware, right? I agree that probably in 2019 there weren't 100 companies. Today there are 100 companies who are building AI accelerators, focused on transformers. Everyone doing some version of digital in-memory compute, and everyone obviously has the same narrative, right? Because Nvidia is not good at inferencing. They're taking training chips, adding memory, and just passing it off as inferencing chips. Inferencing will be a bigger market. Inferencing has probably niche use cases, and for each of those use cases you might need different kinds of chips versus training where one chip wins it all, right? So there are multiple different reasons, which is why now it's a very hot market. Now within hardware, you obviously your node determines the number of transistors you put in the chip, and now you're playing with how much compute, how much memory, what interconnect you're using within compute, how much of that is matrix multiplication. Maybe that's the name of the company. You can share a little bit about why D matrix, and how much of it is general purpose computation, right? So that's what everybody is playing with. How do you differentiate today when there are 100, not 100, but maybe 10 really well funded companies attacking the same problem statement with roughly a similar approach?
Yeah. Yes, I think if you look at the market, it has there are not as many startups now looking back in 2019, because it was a really a free for all at that time. There was so many different problems to solve in the AI computing space, and companies were coming at it from very different angles. There was no clear winning architecture back then, so there was just so many approaches. That is consolidating a bit now. We can clearly see that folks who are really attacking the data center space, that list is now down to about 10, call it, right? There are companies that are attacking the edge market, and that is probably down to another 10. So there is, I would say, companies that are funded at scale, and this is not for the faint-hearted. This is certainly not. It's a very capital-intensive problem to go solve. So you really need you need investors with deep pockets, and companies that are now funded at scale are probably in the tens, right? There's probably like 10 or 20, call it, right? And I've done that count lately, and it's probably we're able to count up 15 to 20 companies that are reasonably well funded to kind of go to that next step. So let's kind of focus on the data center, because that's where D-Matrix is really focused on today. There are companies that came before us, circa 2015, 2016. And then there are companies that are came after us, right? And what we are seeing, the pattern that we are seeing, is the companies that came before us were more general purpose, because they were there was no clear market, there was no clear workload. So they were like, we don't know where this is going, so let's keep this general enough, and we can go. We were kind of a tweener. We said, okay, there's enough data to suggest that we should bet on transformers, but there's not enough data to suggest that we should bet the whole farm on this thing. So let's make the chip programmable. Let's make the platform programmable, but with a lot of efficiency around transformers. right? So many times people confuse our product as, oh, you can only do this. No, the product can actually do transformers. It can do, convolution. It can do all kinds of workloads. We can even do recommendations. It's just that the software won't be optimized. The kernels won't be optimized for that, right? So we are kind of a tweener, right? But then I'm seeing companies that are coming after us, accelerators, that are going all in, betting the farm on transformers. Oh, I'm like printing the transformer architecture into my ASIC. I'm just going to. That's my approach, right? And that can be a risky approach, because now at this point you are kind of precluding the evolution of how AI models could evolve, right? And so we think our approach wins. Something that is generic enough but has got the right optimized level of focus on the largest portion of the market. In which case, in this particular case, it's going to be generative AI type of workloads or transformer type of workloads, right? Now, just to kind of add one more point, you said, okay, it seems like a lot of people are approaching it in a similar way. True, digital in-memory computing is becoming very popular with, other companies too. But I think that is not the core. That is one piece of the overall innovation. It's not just about the compute engine, but it is about how you put the whole thing together. I like to call it a recipe. The D-matrix solution is a recipe of ingredients, and each ingredient has been very carefully picked. Whether it is the digital in-memory compute and how we implement it. It's one thing to say I do digital in-memory compute, but there is a lot of nuance within digital in-memory compute and how you implement and put it together, right? So there is that piece. There is what we call numerics, how we do mathematical representation of models for inference and how we bake it into the digital in-memory computing engine. How do we build chiplets? How do we build chiplet interconnects to connect these chiplets? How do we package this stuff so that the platform can keep scaling over time? How the software is built to take advantage of all of this stuff, and when it's put together, right? Software, if it is targeted for chiplets, would have to be built differently. Compilers would have to be built differently. So it's like a recipe. And no other company has this unique collection of ingredients in one place. They have one piece or two pieces, but not all five or all six in the same place. That's what makes us different. And then you look at the performance data you get out of a collection of these ingredients, and that is what gives us the differentiation, because it's very well balanced, whether it's compute, whether it's memory bandwidth, whether it's memory capacity and how we put it and how we scale it. It's kind of a more balanced solution. It's not brute forced to focus on any one or two things.
Got it. And I'll push a little bit on it. And obviously, you can't share IP and secrets. And you touched on software. Obviously, software is key. That's how you get the most out of the hardware. And you can probably tackle this question both from hardware and software angle. But like I'm reading from a website, but the Corsair chip is supposed to be 20x better power efficiency, 40x memory bandwidth, 10x better latency, and 10x better TCO than uh, other general purpose GPUs, right? How is that possible? And why can't anyone else replicate some version of that? Because when you read it, it sounds too good to be true. And everyone else would also be doing some, and this is a very lame VC question, but anyways, I'll ask because I am a VC. Everyone can do some version of what you're doing. And obviously, doing everything together well is non-trivial. Very few companies can execute at scale where they do each piece well. I agree with you, some companies might really do one piece well, but not other pieces. But to get such significant edge over others, there needs to be some more magic that you are not sharing with us. So
Sudipto wants to get to the root of. He's asking. He's asking some tough questions. No, these are great questions. So yes, I think yeah, there are three. When you look at what customers, and we are spending a lot of time with customers these days. There's really three things that feature in their buy decisions, right? The three things are: one is, again, all in the context of generative AI inference, right? When I turn in a prompt to an AI model, how fast can you respond, right? So that is user experience. Like, can you turn around a response? How quickly can you turn around a response? Number two, how much does it cost to serve that prompt? And number three, how much power am I going to spend to serve that prompt, right? So really, if you kind of condense it down, it covers CapEx, it covers OpEx, and it covers user experience, which is really the three key ingredients, right? So a lot of the metrics you kind of recited were around those three things, right? It's like I'm very power efficient, I'm very quick, throughput is really good, latency is really great, right? And memory capacity, right? So the way we do it is, and this is, I know it sounds like this is a bit of a cop out, but this is actually the truth, is we have done a much better job at coupling compute and memory, right? And let that sink in a little bit, right? When I say that, it may not be very obvious, but you look at generative AI inference models, right? They require compute, they require memory. They require a lot of compute on the front end of the processing of the prompt, and they require a lot of memory, bandwidth and memory capacity on the back end of the processing of the prompt, right? So the best solution is one that will optimize both compute and memory, and not only that, it will find a way to couple compute and memory. And this is not just about the digital in-memory compute, that's just one piece of it. It is also about how you package memory and compute together. And we have just done a much better job at putting memory and compute together, and not just on generation one, but on subsequent generations. The way we are able to bring other memory chiplets into our solution, package it, and provide both capacity and bandwidth, right? That is easier said than done, right? You have to dig into how that was all put together, how that recipe came together, and how that can continue to scale generation over generation, not just a one generation thing. How can it continue to scale generation over generation, and how the software keeps up with that, right? So that is really the kind of the underlying nuance of why you see those numbers, right?
Got it. Okay, I'll rest it at that. Uh, just last question on sort of performance and architecture. One part is performance, but then you have tops for what, right? Because as much as it is a compute problem, I think it's even a bigger energy problem today. If we have to inference for what inference workloads would be maybe 10 years down the road, right? And any thoughts on energy efficiency and how you have baked that in your thought process of building the chip?
Yeah, so the energy efficiency in our case is a byproduct, right? It was certainly very important, but we came at it not from like, oh, we want to build the most energy efficient chip, and that's what's going to dictate the architecture. We came at it as what is the customer pain point, and what would get them to buy. And again, I go back to those three things that customers really think about when they're making a buy decision. One is how quickly can you respond? What is the user experience? Like what will allow me to keep the user on my model for longer? So that is user experience. Number two is how much is it going to cost me to serve that prompt, right? Because I'm trying to operationalize my business. And then is power. So power is, yes, it's one of the decision points, but it is not the decision point. So we came at it from, okay, let's optimize on the first two. And when you optimize on the first two, interestingly, you're trying to do more with less. You're trying to build a solution that can do a lot more, lot more inferencing in less time. You're trying to do something that is doing a lot more inferencing with less dollars. And when you're trying to think that way, when you try to build a solution with that mindset, I want to do more with less, you solve the energy efficiency problem. You're saying, you know what, the next thing is I want to do more inferencing with less power, right? And so the memory compute integration that I talked about also leads to a very power efficient design, because you're essentially saying that the traditional architectures have compute, they have memory, and you're kind of trying to go back and forth, and you're spending a lot of energy doing that. We just created something that puts the two together, and that saves a lot of energy. But in the process, your latency went down. In the process, your throughput went up because you're doing a lot less work while you're generating all that data.
Yeah, makes sense. I'll switch and last couple of questions. Moving from architecture to actually adoption. So as you said, it's very hard to build in semiconductors. Obviously, if you are able to get it right, it's a $1 trillion company, but it's very, very hard. And so a couple of questions on that in those lines, right? First, I think differentiation with other accelerator startups I've covered. Uh, if I compare with the big boys and especially with NVIDIA, right? Today, obviously, everyone is focused on training, which is great. That's the large market, but everyone can obviously see that now training for people to monetize it needs to be inferencing, and that's going to be the large market over a period of time. Today, they might package their training chips with memory, but long term, they will also have their inference optimized chips, right? Which will be built on top of the CUDA platform. And it has happened in the past. There are a lot of startups actually compared with NVIDIA chips of the current generation and build their product. And by the time their product was launched in training, NVIDIA launched something and completely blew their mind, right? How do you compete with somebody like an NVIDIA as a startup? Irrespective of how much capital you raise, you just can't compete with a $3 trillion company.
So that's a great point, right? I think there's a couple of things. When it comes to access to resources, you're not going to beat NVIDIA, right? That cannot be your grand plan. That I'm going to have more access to resources, and that is my winning strategy. You have to attack. The angle of attack has to be something along the lines of I can do something that they cannot do. Or if they try to do it, it is a reset for them. It is basically innovator's dilemma has to kick in, right? And hopefully most of you have heard of innovator's dilemma. It has repeated itself multiple times, over and over again. And you have to attack them on something that forces innovator's dilemma, right? And that is, I think, what we have done. We have essentially created something that they can certainly do it. Can they do it 100%? It'd probably take them a couple of years to slap a solution like this together. Do they have the resources? 100%. Do they have the capital? 100%. But if they do it, it's going to require a reset to the software. It's going to require a reset to CUDA. It's going to require a reset to their very strength becomes their weakness, right? Because right now their moat is CUDA, and if that is exactly what prevents them from, that's what allows innovators' dilemma to kick in. It prevents them from going off and doing something radically different, which would force a rewrite of the software, right? So that is what we did. We essentially created an architecture that is so different, that is really goes back to first principles, that is so focused on inference, that is, if they did it, it would force a rewrite. It's a fundamentally different computing paradigm, right? And then on top of that, we say, hey, inference market, we are really selling to application developers. The reason CUDA is so strong is because on the training side, they're selling to model developers. That model developer community is actually a very small community. It's a research, these guys were researchers. Eventually now they build models. They exist at a grand sum of 5 companies in the world today. Microsoft OpenAI, Google DeepMind, Meta Fair, AWS Anthropic, and I'm missing one, XAI, right? So these are the 5 companies that have, I would say 95% of these model developers. NVIDIA and Jensen personally know each of these guys really well, right? So they go and deliver hardware to each of them long before any of the other companies even get access to hardware, their latest and greatest hardware. These folks start training models a year before any of the other companies even have access to NVIDIA hardware. By the time the other folks catch up on hardware, these folks have spent 2 years training up a model and launching it into the public domain, right? And that's pretty much that's how they keep that 2-year advantage going, and it's almost impossible for anyone to catch up with that, right? Now, on the inference side, the dynamic is actually flipped, because NVIDIA actually becomes an enabler for us. Every time they put a model out, a new, say GPT-4, GPT-5 goes out into the domain, that becomes an inferencing opportunity for us. Now they're like, what, we'll run it on GPUs initially, but after a while, if it really, really breaks out, the cost economics of running this become very important for us. So we're going to either distill it down. So there is a GPT-4 mini that shows up. The dollars per token have to start falling. They might say, what, it doesn't really make sense to run it on a GPU long term. And the target customers are not the model developers. The target customers now are the application developers who don't necessarily like to program with CUDA. Many of these folks like Open, they want to work with things like PyTorch and program in Triton kernel programming. Very different set of guys in a much bigger community.
And just adding, so what have you done on the software side to make this adoption easier? And I remember us chatting in June about how you have made it easier for them to adopt your platform, right?
Right. So I think exactly, and for us, software, we want to lower the barrier, right? Because the lower the barrier of adoption on the software, we don't want developers, application developers, to have to learn something completely different and program the hardware, right? So we have built our entire software stack with open tools, right? So we make it look like a TensorRT stack. If there is an application developer who is familiar with TensorRT or is familiar with PyTorch, they will look at our stack and say, what, this looks the same, this feels the same, right? There could be an underlying compute engine that looks, nothing like a GPU, but the software stack looks and feels the same. I'm very familiar with ingesting models in PyTorch. I can write kernels in Triton, and I can compile. And I can build an application around this if I need to, right? So that is what we have tried to do, is take that hardware advantage and then layer it and abstract it with a pretty open tool software stack that looks and feels very familiar to application developers.
Got it. Understood. Okay, last question, adoption. In the end, you said the first idea on recommendation you said no to because there are only 4 large customers that matter. If I think of anything related to data centers, probably 10 customers really matter. A, is that true? And B, if that is true, how do you break into those 10 customers?
Yeah, I think it's expanding that list. You are absolutely right, by the way. Like maybe just 2-3 years ago, that was the truth, right? But that is rapidly changing, and there are various dynamics at play. Both geopolitical and business dynamics, right? The way this is all playing out. So we look at our customers in four broad buckets. One is the hyperscalers, and there you are right. There is 5 or 6 of these guys who fall into that bucket. But now you have sovereign clouds, you have what we call neo clouds, or AI specialized clouds, and then you also have enterprise clouds. And pretty much we are seeing folks across all these four categories. There are many folks emerging in each bucket, right? So sovereigns, pretty much we are working with multiple sovereigns, and each of them want a play, and they are trying to figure out what their role. I mean, India is a great example. India is now just making a play in how they are going to what they're going to do in AI. Same goes for the neo clouds. These were crypto guys who eventually decided to become AI guys. There are new folks who have raised capital around funding their own data centers. So there is a whole long list of AI folks, many of them having raised capital from sovereigns, right, to fund their efforts. So we see a broad spectrum now of data center guys.
But what's the sales GTM like? Like, how do you build an enterprise sales team for that? How long are the sales cycles? Like, what? It's a very specialized enterprise sales, right? So what goes behind it?
That is very true. So I think I'll tell you about D-Matrix. So the way we are looking at it is our first gen product is really heavily focused on enterprise LLM and what we call video, highly interactive video applications. We think that is going to be a big killer app, right? And there are fundamental problems in the way GPUs are built and how they're bolted with HBM memory that won't work for highly interactive video applications. So I think our architecture is wonderfully suited for that. And then enterprise LLMs are naturally very interactive. So we want to target enterprise LLMs. And the way we do that is we kind of work directly with the end customers. We create a pull or a demand at the end customers. We don't only work with the hyperscale clouds or the neo clouds. We'll talk to them, but we also go directly to the end customers, like, for example, a JP Morgan or a Morgan Stanley, who are customers of OpenAI. And then we'll try to create demand there, make them understand why our solution is better, and they'll go back into the hyperscalers and pull for us, right? So we are doing a whole end-to-end kind of GTM around the enterprise LLMs. We are very excited by reasoning. Our next generation product is really targeted for reasoning. And we think that unlocks the inference opportunity at a totally different scale. Because now you're looking at agentic, you're looking at multiple, right now I think the reason there is, AI is a bit slow on the uptake in enterprises is because it's still it still requires a lot of human interaction. You prompt a model, you don't like the output, you reprompt it, you don't like the output, you fine tune it, you don't like the, you go back and forth till you get what you want. And I think we need to get into a world where chain of thought reasoning will take care of a lot of that, right? And you can just write your prompt in high level English, and this thing can go down and launch multiple agents and run chain of thought on each of those streams, and eventually come up with what is classic system 2 thinking, right? Where it's reflecting, thinking, and come up with a response to your query. And it might take some time to do that, a lot of inferencing, but eventually comes up with a much better response, right? So we think that unlocks that moment, that there is going to be a chat GPT moment for reasoning that has not yet happened, right? Which will probably happen in the next year or two, which will unlock a lot more inferencing. So I think our next generation product is already being planned for that.
Got it. There are some teasers, at least, that ChatGPT had around reasoning, but we'll keep that for a different chat. We're running out of time. That brings me to India. So, Sid, why you, the entire D-Matrix team is in India? What's the focus?
Well, we love the food here. So that's certainly one thing. But no, I think, look, India is a very important geography for us, both from a talent perspective, which we launched our talent center back in early 2022, and pretty early on in the company. I mean, we were not that big to begin with. I mean, we could have really waited. The company back in early 22 was 30, 40 people, but we opened up an India site. And today it is our largest site. We have sites in Toronto, we have a site in Sydney, we have a site in Belgrade, but India is our largest site. And
why 5 geographies so early?
We'll go to where the talent is. Hiring in Silicon Valley is very competitive. Really good engineers all have 4 to 5 offers, and we want the optionality to go broad. The other thing was D-Matrix was born right in COVID, right? So it is what we call a default global company. We are very comfortable working across time zones, and we are very comfortable, with teams being spread out. We were just born that way. That's in our DNA. So we'll go to where the talent is, and that gives us plenty of optionality. So, but coming back to India, I think it's there is a mandate right from the top that AI is going to be important, and India needs to play a very critical role in the new world of AI, and they're trying to figure it out. But I'm seeing stuff happening across the stack, all the way from applications, right, where India has been traditionally very strong. India has a huge population, so a lot of data being generated. So great, data. You need data, you need compute, you need people. You have the people, you have the data. So compute is the missing piece, and that's where D-Matrix can really make a difference. So we want to be here while all this is playing out, and I think we can play a big role.
Got it. Fantastic. I know you wanted to reverse flip and ask me a few questions. So I'll do that and then I'll open it to audience questions.
What? So yes, exactly. And I think I'm going to turn the same because I'm very intrigued by what is happening in India, and you are closer to the situation than I am. So I would love to hear your perspective. You're talking to folks across the stack, all the way from the top, applications down to chips. Where are the problems? What are the near-term problems that India needs to solve to kind of go on this AI journey?
Got it. Um, I think, as you said, right, there are opportunities across the stack. And I'll make a few macro points. Given the audience, India is a 4 trillion economy, going to 8 to 10 trillion in the next 10 years, which means whatever GDP we did from independence, we're going to double it in the next 8 years. That's the opportunity. Second, this entire GDP leapfrog is happening digitally, which means you need compute to power that new digital GDP that is getting created. So that's at a very macro point. Now, to do that, you need innovation for India at Indian cost levels. For example, you're ordering food in India, right? The cost of delivery is around 50 rupees or half a dollar. Now, if you have to build AI on top, the inferencing cost needs to be in cents versus say somebody ordering in London or New York where they're comfortable paying 10 to $12 for delivery, right? So India needs a very specific solution. Now to make it happen, it cannot be only one answer. It needs to start at the semiconductor layer, then you have infrastructure and data centers built out of India, and then you have applications on top. I was talking to you about one of the larger VC funded Indian internet companies that have IPO'd. They spend close to $30 million every year with AWS. As the company scales, you need Indian cost structures for all of that. So for in India's journey, as we look at 4 to sort of $10 trillion, right? We need innovation and across the performance, cost, and energy aspect, different pieces in India will need different optimizations, which are very India-specific problems. Which is why there are opportunities throughout. So where are there opportunities? There are opportunities obviously in the semiconductor layer, which is why we are excited, which is why you are here, which is why we're having the talk. Within the semiconductor layer, I think there are two different kinds of opportunities. One is obviously going after the data center, not data center training because that's a global problem statement, but more data center inferencing and data center edge. Within inferencing, and I know you touched upon it a little bit, there are very specific nuanced use cases. So what a company will need for, say, quality inspection on a manufacturing line versus somebody who is essentially using it as an agentic use case for maybe talking to customers. It's very different. So you have different use cases within the data center problem statement that we're excited by. And then there's a lot of other semiconductor chips that we import from the world that can be made in India at a cheaper cost. So you have semiconductors, then you obviously have the infrastructure and data center where India's data resides in India, and you have to finally reduce the cost per token for it to make sense for India, right? So there we have two investments, a company called Krutrim, which is building the entire stack, semiconductors, as well as providing GPU cloud and building the LLM, and we have a company called NESA. And then obviously we have applications on top. So there's a lot of top-down focus from the government, lot of VC support, and now we're increasingly seeing entrepreneurship happening, which is quite exciting.
Right. And any thoughts on energy? Because that is, you need a lot of energy to power these data centers. And how do you see, does India need to do anything to facilitate the availability of energy, the immense amounts of energy that is going to be needed to kind of build out the data center footprint for India?
So near term, no. Long term, absolutely. So in our minds, right? If I think of that 4 to 10 trillion dollar journey again, as part of that, India needs to be a sovereign country. For you to be sovereign, there are 3, 4 things for which you can't depend on the world. One is food, agri-tech. Second is compute. We have seen what's happening in Taiwan. You need to be complete. Your data needs to reside in India. You need to have your own chips, and you need the compute on top. Third is defense, where you obviously, there have been enough wars in the last 4 years. And fourth is energy. You can't import oil and truly be sovereign. So energy, like compute, is a very big push for the country. Now, how do you sort of solve for energy? You first replace oil with batteries, and then you figure out ways of renewable energy through which you essentially store energy to power batteries. So that's a big focus. There's a lot of focus on EVs. There's a lot of focus on batteries. There's a lot of focus on green hydrogen, and increasingly there's a lot of focus on nuclear as well. So in the next 10 years, just to give you a stat, India has at peak 220, 230 gigawatts of energy capacity. People who are born in India would know a phenomenon called load shedding, which is when electricity goes away because the demand is 250 gigawatts, you have only 220, 230 gigawatts. That's India's capacity till date. India now has tenders out for 50 gigawatt of renewable energy expansion capex every year. So we had 220 gigawatts till now. Next 10 years, we want to add 500 gigawatts of renewable energy for which you will get government incentives and subsidies. That's the scale of energy expansion that we're talking about. If that happens, obviously a portion of that will come to compute. But energy, in my opinion, is even a bigger problem statement than compute for India today, because you need compute for all the enterprises, but you need energy for 1.3, 1.4 billion people.
That's obviously going to be a big challenge to get through. You don't have to answer this question, but if there was a company you wanted to invest in across the stack that you still haven't invested in, which one would it be? And I would love for you to say D-Matrix.
We are VCs and we are horses for courses. For today's night, it's D-Matrix, and I'll keep it with that.
Thank you so much.